Welcome to Module 6, where we explore the root cause theory, focusing on low growth as the primary driver of educational underperformance. The objectives for this module are to articulate the conventional versus Hare-Hale framing, explain the significance of the 0.025 sigma threshold, understand compound interest logic of educational deficits, use the EL exception as proof of principle, and state the 5 pillars of the root cause argument. The conventional framing of educational policy focuses on the gap, the distance between where students are and where they need to be. Policy responses aim to close the gap, interventions move scores up, and resources are allocated based on gap size. However, this framing misses the most critical variable. The Hare-Hale framework shifts attention to the growth rate, the velocity at which the gap changes over time. A large gap with strong growth is solvable, while a small gap with negative growth is a disaster. The critical question is, how fast are we moving? The central claim is that reading underperformance is not caused by the gap. It is caused and perpetuated by the failure to generate growth at or above the 0.025 sigma Hare-Hale threshold. This claim is both simple and radical. This approach is radical because it inverts the policy conversation. The old focus on the gap size is replaced with a new focus on growth rate. Interventions must target growth rate, resources should be based on growth deficit, and the gap is seen as a symptom, not the problem. Using a disease analogy, the gap is the symptom, and insufficient growth is the disease. Treating only the fever or the gap without addressing the root infection, the growth deficit, means the patient gets worse. Measuring the gap alone ensures it persists or widens. The 0.025 sigma Hare-Hale threshold is not arbitrary. It represents 1/10 of the U.S. national growth norm of 0.25 sigma per year. This benchmark is supported by decades of longitudinal data across standardized assessments and was empirically established by Bloom et al. In 2008. Bloom et al.'s 2008 growth benchmarks showed annual growth effect sizes trend sharply downward across grade levels. For example, Grade 4 reading growth for students at the 25th percentile is approximately 0.36 sigma. The 0.025 sigma threshold is only about 7% of that baseline. This low figure is produced only by active retreat or severe stagnation. To fall below 0.025 sigma, a district must experience either active score decline or stagnation so severe that growth rounds to zero. Normal variation, temporary dips, and COVID effects do not alone produce the multi-year patterns observed. This signifies a structural failure. Educational deficits compound like debt. At a negative 0.71 sigma per cycle, the cumulative gap increases significantly each cycle. After one cycle, it's 0.71 sigma. After 2, it's 1.42 sigma. And after 3, 2.13 sigma. Each cycle, the problem gets harder to solve because the gap is growing. We can visualize compound damage with a savings versus debt analogy. Positive growth in a savings account shrinks the gap to your goal. Negative educational growth is like compounding debt, where the gap to zero grows exponentially. The Hare-Hale proxies times 10 multiplier is not a penalty. It is the mathematical consequence of compound damage. A system growing at negative 0.71 sigma per cycle is not maintaining the status quo, but increasing the gap by 0.71 sigma units every 2 years. Linear extrapolation cannot capture this reality, but the proxy does. Linear thinking suggests negative growth only adds some years to the deficit. In contrast, compound reality dictates that negative growth multiplies the years needed to catch up because each cycle makes the gap larger, making it harder to close the next time. The proxy captures this multiplier effect. The English learner subgroup serves as a natural experiment and is the Hare-Hale theory's strongest proof of principle. It involves the same district, assessment, and proficiency target. Yet, a different growth direction leads to a radically different outcome, demonstrating the power of growth rate. The EL comparison proves the theory. English learners have a lower score, but a positive effect size of plus 0.12 sigma, leading to a 25-year timeline. All students have a higher score, but a negative effect size of minus 0.71 sigma, resulting in an estimated 1,120-year timeline with the proxy applied. EL proves the theory because despite having the worst current score, they have the best projected timeline. The only difference is positive growth. If the gap were the root cause, EL would have the worst timeline, but they have the best. Therefore, growth, not the gap, is the root cause. The proof in one sentence is, Even modest positive growth at a rate below the national norm produces infinitely better outcomes than negative growth. The plus 0.12 sigma growth for ELS leads to a 25-year timeline, while the minus 0.71 sigma negative growth leads to an estimated 1,120-year timeline. The Hare-Hale root cause theory rests on 5 logical pillars grounded in observed data. These include the observed fact of negative growth, the logical consequence of gap increase, the mathematical proof of the 1,120-year timeline, counterfactual proof that positive growth collapses timelines, and cross-subgroup proof showing the EL exception validates the theory. Pillar 1 is the observed fact that Albuquerque's grade 4 reading effect size from 2009 to 2024 is minus 0.71 sigma. This is not a projection or estimate, but an empirical measurement calculated from NAEP 2-day data. Pillar 2 is the logical consequence that negative growth does not maintain the current gap, it increases it. Every 2-year NAEP cycle at minus 0.71 sigma makes the gap 0.71 standard deviation units larger. This is arithmetic, not interpretation. Pillar 3 is the mathematical proof showing that at the Hare-Hale threshold, the gap to proficiency equals 27.84 sigma, which results in 1,120 school years. However, at the actual negative growth rate, the timeline is infinite because the gap is growing, not shrinking. Proficiency is receding. Pillar 4 is the counterfactual proof. Under every positive growth scenario, the timeline collapses from impossibility to defined policy targets. The variable that determines the timeline is the growth rate, not the initial gap. Pillar 5, the cross-subgroup proof, demonstrates that the EL subgroup's positive growth eliminates the need for the Hare-Hale proxy and produces timelines 10 times shorter than negative growth subgroups. The gap alone does not determine the timeline. Growth direction does. In summary, low growth is the root cause of persistent underperformance. The 0.025 sigma threshold separates recoverable from irrecoverable trajectories. Educational deficits compound like debt, and the EL exception proves growth direction determines outcomes. 5 pillars of evidence support this claim. Next, we will cover Module 7, Policy Implications.